Where is Betty White now that she's died? That's the question today in Bad Theology. Welcome to Today in Bad Theology. If you're new to us or you haven't already, please click the like and subscribe and all that good stuff so that you can get new content every time it comes out. Today I want to look at a cartoon about Betty White. And you may be asking, why on earth am I talking about Betty White? This is not really about Betty White. It's about the cartoon's depiction of heaven, okay? And of course, the assumption is that Betty White is in heaven. And I say right off the bat, like I think everybody else on earth, I mourned when Betty White died. So this is not a question about whether she is worthy of something, but rather a question about the depiction of heaven. And so I want to show the cartoon here and talk about it. Because there's bad theology in this cartoon for all the good that it's trying to claim. The cartoon in question was drawn by Marshall Ramsey. He works for a newspaper in Mississippi, and but it's the cartoon shows all over the place. And I want to talk about the cartoon's depiction of heaven here. It shows, of course, Betty White comes to heaven, and St. Peter says, well, you know, it says something about you that at 99 years old, everyone thinks you died too young. The question here, as I said, is not about whether Betty White is in heaven or where you go when you die. That is a question for another video. And if you'd like me to make one about the bad theology of what happens when we die, I'm happy to do that. But I want to talk about the theology that's in this depiction, right? And so I'm not really here to pick on Ramsey either, though Marshall Ramsey depicts heaven fairly frequently in his artwork. Just in the last 6 weeks here, we've got three of his art pieces of art are about heaven. So it is a theme there, but I'm not picking on him so much, because what do you do when you do a cartoon like this? When you draw a cartoon like this, you've got a finite amount of space, and you got to get your point across, right? And so, in order to make sure that we, the audience, know you're talking about something, it has to be very obvious very quickly. And if you want us to know that you're thinking about the hereafter, you've got to depict the hereafter in a way that everyone's going to identify immediately. And that's what I want to talk about. The fact that we all know what this is, right? When we see this picture, right? If you're an American looking at this picture, you know what's going on, right? Even without the giant name tag that says Betty White on it, you know this is a depiction of heaven. We're trying to get into heaven. This is a depiction of the hereafter. So it's instantly recognizable, but what does our default instantly recognizable image of heaven say? There are three things in this picture I want to talk about, because they're kind of crucial for any depiction of heaven to make sense to us immediately, right? We all know immediately what you're talking about. And those three things are the clouds, right? And the gate, and like the maitre d', the host, St. Peter, right? Those things we recognize right away as being part of heaven, and you need to have them there in order for us to understand what you're talking about, right? You can switch things up some, but we all recognize if you've switched them, right? That, oh, instead of clouds, there's this, right? Oh, instead of St. Peter, it's somebody else. So I'm going to look at those in order here. The order I mentioned, the clouds first. Everybody knows it's heaven because it's in the clouds, right? And I would really hope that we know that that's not a thing. That the hereafter is not in a cloud in the sky above us at all times. But, of course, we live in a world of flat earthers and whatnot, so maybe there are people who do believe that the dead are literally in the sky looking down on us at all times. This is this is, of course, we're taking a first century worldview where the earth was finite, not finite, but flat. We take this first century view of the world as being flat, and the sky above it, and heaven being above the dome of the sky. But we know differently now. And so the idea that, that God lives above the sky is one we've had to revise. If we're going to do good theology has to keep up with our understanding of reality. Right? If your science says, I'm sorry, but if you go into the sky, there's just more sky until eventually you're in space, your understanding of heaven needs to adapt. We can't pretend that God is in the sky and be doing good theology. Right? We have to accept that God is somehow present, and the absence of God, we say God is both immanent and transcendent. God is here all the time and not here in the way that you and I are. That whatever that not here is has to be understood differently. It can't just be, well, way up there beyond the clouds. That's where God is. And so that when you die, you don't literally go up and then look down on shit, right? But that's a very popular way of understanding heaven. And even if we don't personally believe that, or if our church doesn't say that, that's what our society thinks about what happens when you die. You go into the sky and you can look down on stuff. That is not how my faith tradition understands what happens when you die. All right, that's just not. And so that's, like I said, it's a topic for a different video, but that's a thing here. It's a problem with the theology in this, is that somehow heaven's in the sky. No, right? People fly up there all the time. They've yet to find the place, right? The next thing I want to look at is the gate. And this is a real bothersome symbol here. The gate of heaven, yeah, I know we think about there being gates to things like, there's a saying in the Bible, the gates of hell won't prevail against St. Peter. Well, heaven must have gates also, and of course they must be pearly. And it's a symbol that we recognize right away. There are the gates. You got to pass through them. And that's problematic because it suggests that in the hereafter there will be in and out groups. Now, in and out groups are a human construction, right? There are people who are in my group and aren't in my group, who I'm happy having out of my group. And there are people who are very happy to have me out of their group. And a lot of animals have in and out groups. It's not just human beings. But the assumption that in the hereafter there will be in and out puts us in dangerous territory, right? We've already decided that there are limits on who can be in. There are certain things that might get you thrown out, certain criteria that we must meet. And whatever those are not really spelled out clearly in the popular picture, but it's meant to be evident that some people won't be in or be able to get in, even though the gates in this picture are clearly large enough that you could just walk right through them, if they're not electrified. That somehow there's a border, right? Somehow there's an outside that you could be thrown into still. And I can't take credit for the statement. I never heard the sermon spoken, but the legendary statement by the liturgical scholar Gordon Lathrop in a sermon that he preached at what was then the Lutheran Theological Seminary at Philadelphia, that once you have drawn a line in the sand, you can bet that God is on the other side of it. If we insist on having gates and walls around heaven, that's fine, just as long as we understand that God's not inside of them. God's gone out to where the people we want to throw out are. All right? It's a dangerous concept of God, that God will eventually side with us and will have the same enemies that we do, all right? And so that's bad theology. Right? Then I want to look at St. Peter, and there are like two things about St. Peter that are troublesome to me. Now, I get it why St. Peter is depicted as the person at the gate, because Jesus says, whatsoever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, whatsoever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven, and he says it directly to St. Peter. He also says, you are the rock upon whom I will build my church. And so we've kind of decided that St. Peter is the doorman to heaven, right? By a grossly misinterpreting a couple of passages of Scripture, we've determined that St. Pete is the guy who's there. Now, on the one hand, it's very incarnational to say that there will be a human being waiting for us to deliver the verdict on whether we get in or out, right? It's nice. Somebody who understands what life was like for us. And that God uses human beings. I'm a very big believer in that. God uses human beings to do God's work. But it's, on the other hand, still very impersonal. God is still beyond, right? You get there and there's St. Peter, but God is somehow not in the picture yet. There's another human who can still fallibly decide you're not supposed to be there, or accidentally let you in when you're not supposed to be there. And more than that, though, there's a bigger problem in that God is impersonal. And this begins to get into my other problem with this image, that there's this list, that somehow you have a register of all the stuff you've done. I'll get to that in a moment, but this list is impersonal, right? I mean, it's gone, just like with any text that you've written, that the author is not quite there, right? And so you've just got Pete reading this list. That's not the God of the Bible, all right? This is terrible theology. God in the Bible is like in your face, all right? Yeah, again, we say God is transcendent and immanent. There is a God who we cannot see, though our scriptures promise we will. And there is a God who we do interact with, and throughout the Bible there's a lot of interacting going on with God. And in the New Testament there's a ton of interacting going on with Jesus, who we say is God. And God has mood swings, and God can be persuaded to do stuff, and God changes God's mind. That's stuff that bothers a lot of us. We say, because we depend, we as human beings in our world, in the Western world, especially in our scientific world, depend on a God who is stable so that our scientific hypotheses will work. And even though science has moved on, we have no more need of God, we can explain the things that we used to depend on God to explain. Most of us still cling to the idea that God is, immutable, unchanging. That's not the God of the Bible. It's not the God of the Bible. God of the Bible is very personal and deals personally with people. Why would that change when you get to heaven or you get to the hereafter? God's just, oh no, I'm sorry, I'm retired now. No, universe is done, so is my job. No. Right? So it's a non-biblical image of God, that God remains impersonal and has simply this list of deeds that you've done, and then St. Peter gets to read the verdict or to make the judgment. We say in the Creed that Jesus will make the judgment. So what is St. Peter doing with this list? What's on the list, of course, is the things you've done, and this gets to maybe the most obvious problem to have with this. It's the one I come to last. Is the idea that you will get into heaven on the basis of the things you did. This is blatantly anti-Christian, right? As a Lutheran, You know, like Lutherans are kind of the ones who constantly sound the drumbeat of there is no works righteousness, right? You cannot earn your way into heaven. The deeds that you perform will not earn you a place there. But that's not like something that we made up. We just kind of take that place in the broader church, reminding everybody of something that was deemed to be the correct orthodox teaching of the church in the earliest centuries. You cannot earn your way into heaven. God does not need your good works and is not impressed by them. Your neighbors need your good works, and God commands you to do them for their sake. But God's going to raise the living and the dead at the end, our faith says. And when God judges the living and the dead, that judgment is of the resurrected. And I don't really know that I'm able to say that anybody in their resurrected state is somehow unworthy of getting into heaven. You know, the moment that I start saying that anybody in their resurrected state might not quite qualify, I've drawn that line on which I can guarantee you God is the other side of the line from me. I don't get to decide those things. So yeah, this idea that you're going to get in because of your good stuff, no. This is outright heresy, right? This is Pelagianism or semi-Pelagianism, or whatever the hell else you want to call it. Right? So, my beef is not with Ramsey, who drew the cartoon, though he draws this kind of cartoon a lot, but rather with our popular understanding of heaven, that we recognize immediately what he is depicting as a gated community in the sky, where an impersonal God sets St. Peter to determine who gets in and out based on what they did. That's our society's image of the hereafter. That's what we're up against in the church, is fighting against this image of the hereafter. Right? Now, I'm not going to get into, in this video, questions about, well, then what do you think you know about the hereafter? That's for a question, that's a different question, right? Different question. What does the church say about this? I'm talking about what's wrong with this popular picture, and I've already stated, we have to know that you don't go to the sky when you die. We have to be able to say that God is personal, not impersonal. That there are not gates and walls around heaven, but rather that it's open and God lets in whatever God wants in. And is there even an out? I don't know that I'm able to say that. Sure can't say it here. And that what I do on earth, while it matters to the people around me who God commands that I love. But I can't earn my way in no matter how much stuff I do. Right? That's the bad theology in our popular image of the hereafter. It's the bad theology in this picture. I have known who Betty White was my entire life. She reminds me of my beloved late paternal grandmother in a lot of ways, who I miss also. I mourn her passing, and I appreciate the sentiments of this cartoon. She was an amazing person. It's still bad theology. It's still bad theology. And I don't pin that on the artist. I put that on our culture and our depiction of the hereafter that demands that if you want to be able to explain this is heaven, you gotta draw this. That's it for this video. Thank you for being with me. As I said at the beginning, please like, subscribe, click the little bell. It'll alert you when a new one comes out. Don't hesitate to drop a comment below, or if you want to contact us, we do have a Facebook page. I will have the link to the Facebook page in the video description. It's also on the channel description. See you next time.